Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Halper speaking to you from Jerusalem on my monthly ICAD update on what's happening in Palestine, Israel. The month now is November 2025, and we've seen some pretty dramatic events happening over the last month or so, certainly over the last few days. But it's very important for us to put where we are politically into perspective, because these are really our crucial times for our struggle for Palestinian rights. Uh, right now, in terms of the whole struggle itself, um, and in terms of the settler colonial process that's going on that we've talked about quite a bit, we're in between the stage of pacification and normalization. Normalization, as we've talked about before, is the way settler colonialism wins. If you think about the United States or Canada or Australia, that's what you think about. You don't think about the United States. The first thing that doesn't come to mind are Native Americans. When you talk about Australia, Native Australians don't come to mind immediately, right? It's been normalized. The countries are the countries. The United States is the United States. Australia is Austria. And that's what Israel is. That's when Zionist settler colonialism will prevail here in Israel. When this whole country between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River is certainly is simply perceived as Israel. You go to your travel agent, you'll buy a ticket. You want to go visit the church in Bethlehem. You want to go visit Hebron. You buy a ticket to Israel. You land in Ben Gurion Airport. You go on an Israeli highway with an Israeli tour guide. You visit all these sites. You visit the rest of Israel, including the beaches in Tel Aviv, and you go home. The first thing that does not come to mind are Palestinians. And as you're traveling around the country, you're in Israel. There's Hebrew names all around. There's Hebrew highways all around, or Israeli highways. Um, you see Israel all over, and it's very, very hard. They're still there, but it's very hard to find the Palestinians because they'll be locked away in small enclaves behind Israeli highways, behind Israeli settlements, on smaller kinds of roads where you're going to have to really intend to try to encounter Palestinians in order to find them. And certainly the image of the country will be one of Israel. In fact, as Google Maps has already shown us, Palestine and even the occupied territories will be eliminated from most of the maps. Uh, and this is where Israel is going with the United States in terms of the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords are coming down the pipeline. Yesterday, as I'm speaking to you today, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, was just in the White House. They had meetings on normalization. And yesterday, I think it was yesterday, the same day, the UN had this vote on approving this interim government for Gaza, but as a part of it, as creating a credible pathway towards a Palestinian state. So we have two political initiatives now that are being integrated. One is the normalization of Israel, which includes all its settlements. And the other one is the two-state solution that has to fit into that wider form of normalization. Uh, and if, in fact, normalization comes about, um, it's really a challenge to our struggle and to the Palestinian struggle because normalization is a closure. Normalization is not negotiations. The Palestinians are not a part of it. Normalization is an agreement between states, the United States, Israel, and the Arab countries. And once whatever is normalized, and right now we're talking about a two-state apartheid that's in the pipeline, that becomes the reality. And there's very little political space for Palestinians or those of us that are supporting Palestinian rights to reopen the struggle for Palestinian rights. Because we'll come and we'll say normalization, but what about Palestinian rights? This is apartheid. The Palestinians are locked into a so-called state on 15% of the country in little enclaves. And the answer is going to be, sorry, it's over. It's been normalized. Normalization is normalization. It's over. We've moved on. There's Sudan, there's still Ukraine, there's other urgent issues. We've moved on. The Palestinian issue, from our point of view, is finished. The situation on the ground has been normalized, recognized by the Arab states, much of the Muslim world, the United States, and Europe, of course, and most of the rest of the world will fall into place. And then it's over. So normalization, in my view, is the greatest threat to the Palestinians since the Nakba. And that's exactly where we are right now. But before we get to normalization, there has to be pacification of Palestinian resistance. You know, the Arab street certainly does not accept pacification, does not accept normalization with a greater Israel that includes its settlements. Most of us and much of the international civil society does not accept this, really does accept Palestinian rights. But government decisions go another way because they have their own interests and they really don't listen to us. And so the trick is going to be, especially for Saudi Arabia, that's the crown jewel in this whole Abraham Accords and normalization plan that's coming down the pipeline, will be how can we normalize with Israel, including its settlements, and yet not incite the public opinion, even in Saudi Arabia, as repressive as it is, and in the rest of the Arab world. So there has to be a period of quiet, industrial quiet, between the genocide, the fighting, the destruction in Gaza and in the West Bank, the resistance, and the ability to normalize that demands a kind of industrial quiet. Everything seems normal. And then you can simply go on and finalize the normalization process, without any resistance. So we're in a stage now where Israel has to break all Palestinian resistance in order to go ahead with normalization, which is Israel's and Zionism's end game. And that's why we've had Gaza for the last 2 years. It's not over from Israel's point of view. Even today, there's some vicious attacks on Israel, always with the pretext of Hamas doing something to break the ceasefire or something to provoke Israel, even though we know that Israel is really the one that's breaking the ceasefires all the time. It's provoking under the radar, so it doesn't seem that Israel's responsible. And then when Hamas reacts, or or there is an incident or whatever, Israel uses it in a disproportionate way to continue its pacification. It's still not in the middle. It's getting close to the end, but it still has not broken Hamas resistance. It certainly hasn't disarmed Hamas, and Hamas remains a political force in Gaza and in general in the Palestinian community. So that it's hard for Israel now because you do have some American and international oversight over what's going on in Gaza. Israel can't just continue the fighting the way it has been, although in the West Bank, the pacification campaign is going on. In the refugee camps in the northern West Bank, where about 40,000 Palestinians have been displaced, that isn't very much in the news. And of course, in the tremendous settler violence of the West Bank, that is becoming more and more in the news, but is nevertheless going ahead with the approval of the Israeli government, the Israeli army, the Israeli police, in order to grab as much land as possible and to drive out as many Palestinians as possible, because normalization, again, is not negotiations. Normalization is recognizing the facts on the ground. In other words, the day that Israel and the United States and the Arab countries finalize the normalization, the Abraham Accords, whatever facts are on the ground on that day are what's normalized. So right now, Israel is in a process both of pacification to quiet the Palestinian resistance, try to end Palestinian resistance in order to get to that quiet needed for normalization, and it's trying to create the maximal facts on the ground, the most land, the most settlements, the least Palestinians, in order that that maximal situation is what's normalized, not what exists today or tomorrow, whenever normalization. So every day Israel is pushing and pushing in a brutal, violent way, both to pacify Palestinian resistance and to grab as much land and expel as many Palestinians as possible until the day of normalization. So that's really where we are. Now, the UN voted again, and Saudi Arabia seems to be insisting that there be a credible pathway to a two-state solution. And this has always been a danger for Palestinians, because by two states, we really mean apartheid. We really mean an Israel on maybe 85% of Palestine and the Palestinians restricted to 15%. Let's just look at this really quickly on a map, because this is really the challenge that we're facing today. We have to be the watchdogs. We have to be the ones that are sure that, well, let me put it this way. We have to call their bluff. Governments will always talk about a two-state solution, because that's the way you get conflict management of the situation. And that's the way really that Israel's continual settlement and expansion has always been protected by the international community. So if we're talking about a two-state solution, all right, let's call their bluff. What does that really mean? And these pages that I'm going to show you now are on our ICAD website. So I encourage you to look them over and to pass them around, because this kind of summarizes, I think, what our responsibility is in the international community. So the first responsibility here is to say, okay, if you're all talking about a two-state solution, what would that actually mean? I mean, we know a two-state solution is not going to be. We know it's unjust. We know that Palestine should be a Palestinian, an integral Palestinian country. But nonetheless, they're forcing us to deal with this two states. So we have to be the watchdogs to keep this thing honest. You want two states, really? Okay, well, what does that mean in the minimum? Well, as you can see here, it means that Palestinians have control over their internationally recognized borders. They have to, of course, have all of the occupied territory, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. It's only 22% of Palestine, but there is territorial contiguity, including a safe passage between the West Bank and Gaza. There are borders with Arab states, with Jordan and with Egypt. Palestinians do have control of their water and some of their resources, including, of course, East Jerusalem, the old city, and Bethlehem, that are their economic and tourist, together with the religious and cultural hearts of their state, so they would have a viable economy. And at the same time, they'd have a seaport on the Mediterranean in Gaza and an airport that they used to have at one time. So you could make a case, as unjust as it is, that a two-state solution, a real one that we can't forget, was accepted by the PLO in 1988. We can't reject it, certainly. But what we have to do again is say, okay, if this is what it's going to be, then it really has to be a genuine, viable Palestinian state, even a mini state, which means, again, control of Palestinians over their borders, territorial contiguity, control over all the resources within their territory, including the natural gas deposits off the coast of Gaza, sovereignty over East Jerusalem, especially for economic, but also cultural and religious reasons, the ability to defend its sovereignty and territory, and then the capacity, and this is really, even in this maximal mini state of the two-state solution, it's going to be very hard to reintegrate the refugees, resolve the refugee issue because it's such a small state. But somehow we have to try to address that issue. That is, so in other words, if they're talking about a two-state solution, this is the filter that we should be examining all the proposals that come about, as in the UN or as in the Abraham Accords or whatever. The two-state solution, this credible pathway to a two-state solution is brought up, and it begins to be defined. We have to be sure that it's defined with these minimal conditions in place, because what in fact is on the agenda is Trump's plan of normalization. And here you have the coming together of the two-state idea with Trump's plan of normalization. Trump presented a plan in 2020. It's there. The map is there. We know exactly where the Abraham Accords and the normalization is going. And if you look at Trump's map, it includes Israel, but it includes all the settlements as well. All the Israeli settlements remain under Israeli control, and the Palestinians are reduced to the green areas on this map, which in fact are less than the green areas because Gaza no longer exists as it existed. And what's hard to see on this map is that the three enclaves of the West Bank, the north, the center, and the south, are not connected to each other. There is no territorial contiguity. There's three separate enclaves and whatever's left of Gaza without East Jerusalem. So in Trump's plan of normalization, there is no territorial contiguity. The Palestinians are locked into 15% of historic Palestine in disconnected, non-viable enclaves. There is no Palestinian sovereignty in a meaningful way. As you can see, the Palestinians have no border with an Arab country. Israel would control the border with Egypt in Gaza, and Israel now has already settled and ethnically cleansed the Jordan Valley. So there is no border with an Arab country. Palestinians have no control of their borders now. They're completely surrounded by, encompassed by the Israeli military. And the Israeli military also controls the airspace and communication sphere and the internal movement within this Palestinian Bantustan apartheid entity, because it controls the movement from enclave to enclave. There's obviously no economic viability. Israel controls all of Palestine's natural resources, which are largely located under the settlements. The settlements aren't just located in some arbitrary way on the ground. You have to look at what they control under the ground as well. And of course, Israel will control all the natural gas reserves, even off the coast of Gaza. And in this mini state, there's absolutely no opportunity for the refugees to return. So that this is the reality that we face when we hear talk about a two-state solution. So this, in a way, to wrap up this sort of an update, this dictates our agenda for the moment at this, and this is a crucial moment because the pacification goes on, but it's largely over. I mean, Israel, in many ways, you could actually argue, has broken at least Palestinian armed resistance. It's going to be very hard for Palestinians to continue to resist, and we'll see if it manages to create this industrial quiet. And what certainly is coming down the pipeline again is the Abraham Accords and the normalization, with all the dangers that has of closing the possibility of continuing the Palestinian struggle and normalizing Israel and its basically a two-state apartheid system. So we have to be the watchdogs of all of this. We're still limited because we don't have a political end game of their own, but at least our immediate goal should be to stop the process of normalization. In a way, we should all be thinking about a campaign to stop the normalization of Israeli apartheid. That should be our agenda. And part of I think, hopefully, one of the useful contributions that these updates make, that my updates make, and that others make from here of Palestinians and anti-Zionist Israelis is to kind of bring this important international movement that you're all a part of into more contact with what's happening here on the ground. What we Palestinians and critical Israelis think should be the priorities. Because often in our political movements, we're not really connected to the political dynamics on the ground. I've been all over the world in rallies of 300, 400,000 people for Palestine, all kinds of events. Normalization is almost never mentioned. I mean, Gaza has caught our attention, obviously, most of our attention. The genocide, now the settler violence. I mean, there's all kinds of issues that really appropriately do preoccupy us, but we tend obviously to be reactive. And we have to be more in contact with the political dynamics on the ground. And I'm saying that normalization should be very high up in terms of our priorities and what we're trying to advance in terms of advocating towards a just resolution to all of this. If normalization takes place, my position is the Palestinian struggle is going to be much, much more difficult to pursue. So that's my thought. I encourage you all to look at the ICAD website, icad.org, ICAHD. It's a tremendous resource of materials and analysis, and it really will help you in your work to connect up what's happening here in Palestine, Israel. I'll leave it at that, and let's see what happens until next month. All the best from Jerusalem. Bye.